All right, what's good, y'all? Welcome to Evergreen Conversations, the breakthrough audiovisual storytelling medium that serves as a platform for news, entertainment, sports, and culture. My name is Freddrell Green, and joining me today on this show, we have Jordan Ross, a current Ph.D. student at the University of Pennsylvania, proud graduate of Morehouse College of 2018. And today we're going to be talking about Martin Luther King Day, which passed a couple of days ago. We're going to be talking about the Founders Day at Morehouse College, both of our esteemed institutions that is going to be coming up next month, and also where those two icons, Morehouse and Dr. King, can go in terms of it's both of their legacies in this current political climate, this social climate, with what's been going on in the world today. So, without further ado, Jordan Ross, how are you doing today, sir?
I am well. I am well, Brother Green. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, it's a pleasure to have you. So, first, I want to start off by, you just giving us a little bit of your background so that the audience knows where we can go and knows that they can trust the words that are about to come out of our mouth in this conversation.
Yeah, sure. So again, Jordan Ross, class of 2018 from Morehouse. So when I was at Morehouse, I actually studied philosophy. How I got to study philosophy is an interesting story. I originally started out as like a business major, and one day, a professor that many know, Ilya Davis, we had
Yep.
a great conversation, and he was like, "Oh, you need to be in like social science or humanities or something like that." And I think he asked me a question like, he said, "If you went to Harvard, Yale, or University of Chicago, would you be able to major in business?" Did some research and basically no. And I took his philosophy course, and I ended up studying philosophy like I love with it, especially everything dealing with African American philosophy and philosophies of race. Um, After Morehouse, taught like a small fellowship at an all boys school. I did not like teaching
Mhm.
K through 12. It was not for me. I loved everything about college and higher education. And at the time when I was at Morehouse, we had five presidents. So it was like three interim presidents and two regular presidents. And that phenomenon was interesting to me. And I was interested in just studying more about the history of HBCUs in general. So I applied for a master's program, which I got into the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where I got my master's in higher education. And I was pretty much studying like the history of historically Black colleges and universities. Worked for a little bit as a higher ed professional. Even came back to Morehouse like in 2022 to help with the NSO. Worked at Emory, and then applied for a PhD in that process to the University of Pennsylvania, where I was particularly interested in the collecting practices of Black folks. And how I got into that practice was because of my Morehouse experience. So at Morehouse, if folks don't know, the history book for the college is called A Candle in the Dark, A History of Morehouse College by
Yep.
Edward Jones. And this came out in 1967 for the centennial. That book is so hard to get. It is very, very difficult to get a copy of that book. I remember going into the bookstore after the alumni would tell us about history during NSO. And I was like, well, can I get a copy of this book? And they were like, it's
Uh,
been out of print, for quite some time. Went across to Spelman. It was like, oh, do y'all have y'all history book? Same thing with Spelman College. So tracing kind of that phenomenon of Black people collecting books and collecting archives is what my research is now. So I'm a joint PhD student studying history and education
mm.
between the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences and the School of Education. And yeah, that's where I'm at now. Like, and I study a combination of different things, but I'm primarily in the fields of African American history of education.
Wow, wow, that's just a lot to unpack right there.
Hmm.
I was actually in a class. We talk a lot about HBCUs and
Hmm.
the history and how it's sort of kind of getting taken away from us slowly but surely from a lot of different entities. We were talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, what's going on right
Hmm.
now in the workforce and other different sectors of life. And we talked about how HBCUs were kind of like that pre-concept of what DEI was, giving us a space to go and get our own land, build our own schools, educate ourselves. But we're going to unpack that further in this interview. I wanted to talk a little bit more about, why is it, what is it that you feel like brings you into that intersection? Like, why do you feel that education and African American history is your calling, and that this is something that you want to invest your life into?
I mean, honestly, it wasn't something I initially thought I was going to get into. I thought I was going to be a professional philosopher. That's some of the things I was interested in at Morehouse, and in thinking about these concepts. I think after Morehouse, I was primarily interested in philosophy of education. So I was interested in thinking about interrogating these different ideas. There's another Morehouse brother that inspired me, who's also a philosophy major, Rashad Moore, who's in New York. I think he's class of 2012. Yeah, 2012. And he was looking at the dynamic of philosophy of education of Morehouse in Spelman and these institutions. But for me, probably around 2022, I started to get into the history of Morehouse a little bit more. I was interested in just some of the small things, and I would make these like Instagram posts about Morehouse during Black History Month, particularly like, who are these different people, like Benjamin Brawley, these people, these buildings that we hear about, but we don't necessarily have any idea about who they are. So like even John Hope is my favorite Morehouse president, particularly because he was president for almost 3 decades. And I mean, he literally died working to save the institution. And we transitioned to like a liberal arts college under his tenure. And the idea of the Morehouse man is first spoken by him. That was the first time they had ever been called men before. It was like this, I don't know, like awing experience. And you can read that Howard Thurman has an autobiography where he talks about that experience during John Hope's administration. But all these different things about me studying Morehouse and wanting to know more about Morehouse. And I think also just during the pandemic, I had a lot of time on my hands to look at history, like online through different sources and things like that, especially newspapers. This kind of was like, oh, well, this would be interesting to do history of education in these different capacities. And I had already been collecting these different books about HBCUs. So just to kind of put everything all into practice is nice.
Yeah, you talked about John Hope Bryant and how he significant he was for you. But so many of my brothers now, they always go back to only, Benjamin Elijah Mays. They only look for as far back as him. And he was a great president. He served for a long time, for decades. He mentored Martin Luther King. He was one of the key factors in making Morehouse one of the most significant institutions on the planet. But could you kind of speak on the importance of learning more than just about the famous names, the Martin Luther Kings, the Sam Jacksons, the Benjamin Mayses, the Maynard Jacksons, or the Spike Lees? Maybe going more in depth into the Howard Thurmans, the John Hope Bryants, the Samuel T. Glovers, who are all have names in this, all the facets of our institution.
Yeah. Honestly, it was like conversations with Professor Davis that kind of sparked that whole entire thing, because he would talk about John Hope and all these different people, even Dean Carter. And I think Dean Carter made an interesting point that John Hope would be probably recognized as a greater president than what he is, particularly because like all the people under him that he graduated and made, they died, like they're dead. Like we're talking about, he's president from like 1906 until like 1931. Long time. His first tenure, there was a race riot during his first semester as president of Morehouse. Not only that, his mentor is William Jefferson White, the founder of Morehouse. There are different connections, like he's from Augusta, And there are different connections that we don't necessarily realize. Like Carter G. Woodson named John Hope the maker of men, particularly because of his tenure at Morehouse. Like, if you look up how many HBCU presidents have been produced from John Hope, it's insane.
Yep.
From Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, the first Black president of Howard University, and the
Yeah.
second Black president, James Nabrit, is under John Hope, and all these King's father, like all these different folks. Like, in John Hope has an interesting dynamic because he particularly chooses not to pass as a white man. He looks like a white man, but
Mm.
he makes a deep investment not to do that, particularly because he comes from the Black communities in Augusta. Like, his mother's Black.
Hmm.
So he has a very deep connection to Morehouse that is severely understudied. I know it was a Morehouse brother, a mentee of mine, who just graduated, I guess, last year, Keon Rosado, who's
Yes.
very interested in John Hope and is always trying to, put him at the forefront. And John Hope hired Benjamin Mays with his first faculty position at Morehouse. Like, I think it was like 1921 or 1920, around that time, because he's at the library at the University of Chicago and happens to run into Mays. So that's my little spill on John Hope. He is probably one of the underappreciated presidents that we've ever had.
Right. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
speaking on Keon, I actually remember many freshman orientations with him. He was our last one. Actually, he was talking about a research project he's doing on,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was John Hope Bryant or if it was somebody else, but it's
Mm-hmm.
this married couple, and it was one of the presidents, and his wife was deemed, that's where we got Mother Morehouse from. So I'm not sure if that's
Mm,
John Hope or if that's
it's
somebody
I
else.
think I think it is John Hope.
Okay.
Because he's always doing research on John Hope.
Yeah.
Like, that's
Yeah.
his favorite president too.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
But let's kind of expand now. I want to talk
Mm-hmm.
about, just the state of this type of research, this type of history. You
Mm-hmm.
look in today's day and age now, a lot of history now can be captured digitally. And
Mm-hmm.
also specifically, a lot of the history that you look for in these books and stuff that we talk about is being destroyed or taken away or banned in schools. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we just got our new president, and he was talking about taking away diversity, equity, and inclusion in corporate spaces. Now, that's just one spot, but he can go into other
Mm-hmm.
areas like HBCUs and schools like that. I want to get your thoughts on what do you think the state of Black history, Black culture, and how it's captured in these various mediums, and what it's looking like right now. Are we safe, or are we in a space where we can still, or like that we're in danger?
Mm. I mean, I don't think we've ever been in a safe space. That's why I'm always collecting, like, all the time. I'm always collecting. Like, so this book right here, this is the first edition of History of Morehouse College, the 1917 edition by Benjamin Broadley. Like, and I doubled up on it, particularly because even though this is digitized, let's say something happens to the internet and everything is gone, you still want to have access to these informations. And I think that is why print materials and archival materials are so important to have,
Hmm.
particularly because these things can be gone like within a second. Like, we have no idea what can happen, let's say even within the next 4 years, about information. So it's important to be able to preserve those stories, and it's also important to be able to share those stories. So that's why NSO is so important for Morehouse, because there's like a tradition, or even an oral tradition, that is like in that, so that you can understand the history of the institution, but also just the people among them. And yeah, like, Black studies overall but I don't think it's ever been safe. I
Yeah.
think that we've always been in a state where I think maybe, for the last 5 or 6 years might have gotten comfortable, but this is a tradition that, grew out of collecting as well. So
Right, right. And also speaking on, sort of the significance of keeping that culture and keeping it intact. We talk about, a lot of the people that come out of HBCUs that go on to do
mhm,
great things. One of them being our vice president, Kamala Harris, who was a graduate of Howard. She was almost about to become a president of the United States.
mhm,
Uh, and I actually did a study on this. Most Black students don't even actually go to HBCUs.
mhm,
And because of that, you see a spiral of other circumstances where, like, you'll have issues such as resources, lack of funding from the government, and a lot of HBCUs are actually going away. So,
mhm.
touching on that aspect, uh, why do you think that? What do you think HBCUs first and foremost? Because there are other ways to go about this. What
Mhm.
are some ways in which we need to do to, like, say, like, keep our institutions
Mhm.
intact? Just like we do with our history books and just like we do with other artifacts. What are some things that we need to do from your perspective to keep our institutions safe?
I don't know, brother. That's a hard question because like how can I say this? Because I'm super pro Morehouse. And I appreciate a lot of historically Black colleges and universities, and I understand what it does for people. Um, I think it's also rooted in the alumni making sure that these institutions are taken care of. I think a great example of that is like Morris Brown. Like
Yeah.
Morris Brown, the alumni really, through thick and thin, were trying to preserve the institution in any capacity that they can. Um, that's a hard question because like we don't know about it, and all HBCUs are not the same. That's kind of the point I was getting to. Like there are a different variety of different HBCUs that require a certain amount of attention because you could give $100 million to an institution and that institution still might not necessarily be able to survive. It takes a whole lot of different efforts from both the administration, but primarily the alumni um, are the people that should spearhead in making sure that our institutions stay.
But also speaking on that, a better question I feel to be asked is, the utility. You talk about the fact that we live in an age now, thanks to Dr. King, where we can go to wherever school we want and
Hmm.
we can succeed. And there's multiple examples of that. But with things such as affirmative action being taken away, where the opportunity to go to a school for a Black student has shrunk, it brings a greater need for HBCUs.
Hmm.
But you have the danger of HBCUs being taken away in the purview.
Hmm.
So, as and this may be another hard question, but
Hmm.
I often see this question asked: as a community, is it our obligation to go back to the HBCU, to go back to a time where we not where we weren't divided, but you see a lot of people talk about how we need to go back to reinvesting into our own, not just going strictly to HBCUs, but buying specifically from Black businesses,
Hmm.
utilizing specific Black products, things like that. Do
Hmm.
you, in your opinion, believe we need to go back to that?
Maybe, but also like there are economic challenges. Um, it's hard to go to a lot of HBCUs and you don't have no money. It's real difficult to do that. Um, and I think that there's increasing opportunity to where students are, because there was like an HBCU renaissance with like the last 4 to 5 years, but what
Mhm.
we're seeing now is actually starting to go down. Like there's a bit of a reality kind of coming in to the economic challenges of our institutions. It's hard to tell somebody like, hey, you got to accept this as an institution, but you got to pay $200,000.
Right.
That's a hard thing sometimes when you might have a full ride somewhere. Um,
I can
like for
relate.
me, like yeah, like like for me, like I really wanted to go to Morehouse. Like I'm from Maryland. Um, I wanted to be able to get away from Maryland and just the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, even though like it turned out like most of the DMV folks, we just went down south to Atlanta. So I pretty much knew a lot of the different people who were in the AUC at the time during my 4 years. But it's hard with the economic challenges for all these students to do that. I think that there requires a certain amount of support and steadfastness right now. We see a lot of, I mean, you see this with HBCU presidents, like the HBCU presidents are leaving, particularly because this is a very, very difficult time for our institutions to where things are not always jolly and we're not getting the same amount of funding that we were 2 years ago. But I still believe at HBCUs, and not, if you have the opportunity to where you can go to, like Morehouse changed everything for me. Like it is literally the reason why I'm at Penn, is the reason why I'm at Michigan. I was not a really great reader coming into Morehouse, but coming out of Morehouse, like everything changed for me in all different capacities. And it was people like Professor Davis. It was people like Dr. Welcher. At the time, we had a history professor named Dr. Spurl, who at the time, I think, do they still teach Dr. King's Where Do We Go From Here in world history?
I'm
Is
not
that like a
sure.
requirement?
I don't believe so. I'm not sure.
Man, it was a requirement. Like, so from like 2014 and to 2018, when I was there, your world history class, if you took it in the spring, you would do a paper on Where Do We Go From Here, Dr. King's work. And Dr. Spurl was one of those people that really helped me out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But speaking further on Dr. King, and this will be the last portion of this conversation that we go into. There's been a lot of things that have been going on in the news recently pertaining to Dr. King and his legacy. We had Martin Luther King Day on the 20th, his birthday on the 15th. But another thing that this new president brought up was uncovering the kept files of the FBI on Dr. King's legacy. Now, as a lot of people who look into Dr. King know, Dr. King wasn't necessarily the perfect man. And a lot of people are wondering, whatever that comes out of this, maybe we shouldn't be looking at him in the same light. What do you think?
I'm gonna echo a conversation that I think during the pandemic with Ilya that I had and some other Morehouse brothers, and we were talking about, it's become like King's greatest defeat that we don't allow him to become human. We've never allowed Martin Luther King to be a human being. We've always deified and deitized him when he is a human being. Like Martin, and I'm sure you've heard the stories about when he was at Morehouse and all the craziness things that he used to do and stuff like that. So I think that we have to really humanize him. Like he is a human being. Yeah, he made a lot of mistakes. He did a lot of good things, but I think that the more that we allow him to become human, the more it doesn't necessarily affect anything, because we kind of know a lot of different things that have happened. But I think it's also I think that particular part of Trump's administration is a distraction for other things.
A distraction? What do you mean?
I think that it's going to cause a lot. I think that him doing this stuff is going to particularly have a lot of chatter. Like everybody's going to talk about the JFK files. Everybody's going to talk about the MLK files. I'm sure there will be lots of dissertations and books that arise out of that conversation and with those archives or whatever. But it's going to distract us from what he's actually doing. So he's doing something with his right hand when he's really doing something up with his left. So I think we have to pay attention to what this administration is doing besides all the noise that it's producing.
Right, right, right. And jumping into also, not only how we can live up to King's legacy, but also the legacy of the institution that he went to, Morehouse.
Mhm.
Founders Day is coming up, and for a lot of the folks that are going to be watching this, Founders Day will have arrived. Founders Day to a lot of people is a time to celebrate. Some, it's a time to remember the work is still that there still needs to be done. Others just to look back at the work that they've already done.
Mhm.
First, I want to ask you, what does Founders Day mean to you? And what is your charge to current men of Morehouse, future men of Morehouse, who will be celebrating Founders Day, some of them being their first, some being yet another one? What is your charge? First, what does it mean to you? And what is your charge to other men of Morehouse?
Whew. That's a tough question too. I mean, I honestly reflect upon the sacrifices of both the alumni, um, staff, and faculty um, on the developing the institution. Morehouse is, when we say Morehouse, Morehouse is beyond just the student body. It's beyond the alumni. It's beyond the staff. Like it's the lunch ladies. It's the communities that surround us. Morehouse is a very huge thing, um, and it's an institution that has sacrificed a lot. So that's why I think about John Hope. I think about John Hope because he died working, and the last words he said was that there's still so much work that needs to be done. Like I wish I could have a conversation with whoever's going to replace me about how important it is, about these institutions. So that's why I think Founders Day, is a time of reflection for me where I'm always thinking about the history of Morehouse. And for the student body, like I honestly charge students to really love and take care of each other. Um, I think at Morehouse, we have a structure where we don't grow to really understand each other maybe until like towards the end of the junior year. And the reason why I say that is because when you're a freshman year, you have your residential halls or your residential houses where you're kind of like, you have your own group and there's like everything is cutthroat. Morehouse is a very cutthroat environment, even though people don't like to acknowledge it, but we are very competitive. Um, but in that competitiveness, I think that we can still be able to like lift as we climb for each other. So honestly, like genuinely look out for each other, um, and to be able to love each other. Like um, going through some very tough times, and even with transitions in leadership, like we're about to have a new president for the institution. Um, I just hope that students can continue to grow and look out for each other and love each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That ends our discussion today. Jordan, I just want to say thank you for coming on the show today, man, to talk a little bit about our history, about our dear old Morehouse, about what its impact can have on the community and the world in general. And also, you want to give a shout out to anybody out there that's still there, Professor Davis or anything like
Oh
that.
yeah, absolutely. Especially Ilya Davis, for sure. He was literally my favorite professor at Morehouse College, as well as Dr. Welcher. Both of them are literally the reasons why I'm at Penn, why I was able to do all these great different things and stuff like that. And I feel like they don't necessarily get the appreciation that they should and that they deserve.
Mm,
So those are some faculty members I really, really appreciate. And, I hope they continue to get the love that they deserve.
absolutely, brother. Once again, thank you for coming on the show with me today. And thank you all for watching and listening to Evergreen Conversations, a breakthrough audiovisual storytelling medium that serves as a platform for news, entertainment, sports, and culture. We will see you next time.